Hi, it's Ben, back for another broadcast. This time we're, um, what is it, addressing embracing loss, a path to letting go and moving forward. So uh, today recording from the middle of Midtown Manhattan. Um, Earlier there were jackhammers and sirens going simultaneously, but it seems a bit quieter now, so hopefully it will stay that way. And so another article that I'm completing here that and covering some different aspects of loss, and this time I want to talk about it more from the standpoint of attachment styles, because that has a huge bearing on our ability to, when a relationship is unraveling or not quite working so well, it has a great deal of bearing on our ability to let go and move on and such. So many people being in relationships and where the relationship is, say, again, not working quite that well, or maybe it's already ended. We've gone through a breakup or divorce, and yet we're finding it difficult to let go. And even though, like, our former partner, for instance, is conveyed that they're no longer interested in being in the relationship, and although we may be struggling, it's like our former partners, like they initiated the breakup or the ending of the relationship and have moved on. Maybe they're already seeing someone else, and yet, we're still struggling with all these difficult emotions. And so the question that a lot of us have been asking ourselves is, how is it that some people are able to just let go and move on, while others are not? And how is it that people who are more securely attached, even when a relationship ends, how is it that they're able to be friends? They're able to maintain connections with their former partners. Also, why is it that some of us remain in that painful state of contraction? We're consumed by feelings of grief and sadness and, blame, and we're overwhelmed. And how is it that in these instances, how do we stop ruminating? So in this article, again, we're going to be exploring some of the differences between having a secure attachment style and also those with anxious attachment styles, and investigate why it's considerably more difficult for those with anxious attachment styles to let go and move on. So people with secure attachment styles tend to be a bit more flexible, and for them it's easier to adapt to the changing context of relationship. So when they move on from a romantic relationship, they're able to let go of their attachment to this individual and also their expectations of how that person will play a part in their lives. And they find it easier to, therefore, make the transition relating to this person in a whole new context. If the romantic aspect doesn't work out, they're able to transition to friendship. And and although it may be painful, they too experience the sadness and grief if a relationship comes to an end. Well, they'll make an effort to address the issues and possibly try to salvage the relationship. And yet, when they realize that their needs are not being met within the relationship, their desires, their feelings of attachment will naturally begin to fade. Conversely, those of us with more insecure attachment styles, we tend to operate with these profound deficits. Often the fact that we've experienced traumas and many of our basic relational needs were never met or addressed. And so often there's a tendency for those of us with these insecure attachment or anxious attachment styles to live in fantasy worlds. When our basic needs are not being met, we become engrossed in these fantasies that we tend to project onto the other person. And in many instances, we end up creating these justifications for the other person and their behaviors and the hurtful things they say and they do. And we just assume that the other person's going to come around at some point. And but the unfortunate thing is that when we are in that state of disconnection, it's we're not able to access our authentic emotional responses. And so because of that, when we're not processing those emotions, it's like we fixate on that other individual. We're not able to come into, we're out there in the fantasy as opposed to being able to come into reality of realizing that the relationship has transitioned, things have changed, we're not able to register that this person that we hold this attachment to is either not wanting to be in a relationship or not reciprocating our desire to be, again, in the relationship. And so therefore it maintains that unhealthy attachment. And we end up, because of that, enacting this drama. We're not able to let go and move on and such. So to truly dissolve the attachment that either is no longer working or that has, is no longer happening, for instance, relationships no longer happening, we need to be able to catch ourselves in these moments where we dissociate into fantasy and where we're, the whole projection, and bring ourselves back into the present moment reality, to acknowledge what's really happening, to feel the relational dynamic between ourselves and that other individual for what it is, rather than what we want it to be. It's so easy for us to get caught up in the stories we have in our heads, but it's the powerful force of all these highly charged emotions that are actually the highly charged emotions that we're not allowing ourselves to feel. We don't want to feel the pain or sadness or those horrible feelings of loss. I don't know if I think it is the sirens coming through on the broadcast, but not much I can do about that. Welcome to New York City. So all of those highly charged emotions, the fear of loss and, the pain, the anguish, the grief of, that we're resisting. We don't want to go there. We don't want to feel that. And because of that, not allowing ourselves to experience our genuine emotional responses, what happens is it just, it keeps us in that dissociative state where we're out there in fantasy land, in the projection that we have on that individual that we're wanting to be in a relationship with. But anyway, so when we're struggling with these anxious attachment styles, the tendency is that we generate all these persistent, as I said, fantasies. We create these narratives or stories in our head, and we may try to stop them, but we end up getting stuck in this self-reinforcing cycle. And again, what happens is it's the fact that we have all these very powerful, highly charged emotions, and it's like they fuel the narrative. We keep going on in the story. Those highly charged emotions. It's like it's from these emotions that generates these fantasies that we experience that get projected out onto the other person. And what it does is it perpetuates this whole addictive cycle. We're addicted to the person, we're addicted to the relationship, and then it intensifies these feelings of anxiety and turns into this long drawn out drama instead of just being able to let go and move on. And so I think it's important, that we pay attention, that when we're connecting with an individual, when we're in a relationship, or we're spending time with someone, when you're with them, how do you feel? For instance, do you feel a deep sense of connection? And yet, on the other hand, is there an underlying anxiety, a deep foreboding that on some level it's like a part of us is just saying it's not going to work out? You might feel lost or abandoned or cut off when they're not around. But take a moment, when you do find yourself caught up in these crazy making lovesick dramas, what stories are you telling yourself in your mind when this happens? And pay attention to how you're feeling in these moments. Again, how are you feeling in their presence, when you're in their presence, when you're not in their presence, and even more so when they haven't called or texted? What thoughts, what imagery are playing out in your mind? And also, in terms of relational dynamic, are you sensing a lack of connection, or that your partner or that person that you're spending time with, are they not that invested in the relationship? Is it leaving you feeling anxious, uncertain? Are they saying and doing things, hurtful things? Whatever is taking place in terms of, as you're connecting with this individual, or attempting to, at least, how is it making you feel? Observe your feelings that arise from within. And when that happens, very important, notice the feelings, where are they situated in your body, and breathe very softly and deeply. Many of us resist these more vulnerable parts of ourselves. We don't want to go to these places within ourselves where we're feeling vulnerable. But in not doing so, that adversely affects our ability to come into reality, and when necessary, to be able to let go or work through those unhealthy attachments and to let go. It keeps us stuck in that painful cycle of longing and suffering. It prevents us from flowing with the natural cycles of relationship and of life itself. So it's critically important for us to be able to show up in the reality of our lives, instead of running away or dissociating into fantasies, into the narratives we create around relationships, or by telling ourselves, the relationship didn't work, for instance, it didn't work out. Instead of telling ourselves that, well, it didn't really matter anyway. Again, important thing is just, what do you feel in response to the relationship? Where are the feelings situated in your body? Bring your awareness into what you feel. Fully immerse your awareness in these feelings, and be breathing softly and deeply. Because as you do so, it's going to help you to do the deep level processing of your life experiences, and more specifically, what's happening in the relationship. If it's really not working out, or not working all that well, it's going to help you to be able to, come to terms with either the relationship is ended, or you're going to become clearer, develop greater clarity about what's actually happening, the issues you need to be addressing. And many of us, we get into trouble because, throughout our lives, we've had this habit of, when something is uncomfortable or difficult, we tend to not want to go there. We don't want to feel. We tend to disconnect from our emotional responses. And so what happens is, it ends up creating this backlog of all these emotions that we haven't dealt with, pertaining to, the various issues or events that have occurred in our lives that have created a lot of stress, pain or suffering, traumas that we've experienced. And so what happens is it creates this backlog again of all this residual emotion. And so when we go through a breakup or other devastating losses, it precipitates the emergence of this long history of, past breakups and other losses, even the death of a loved one or friend or something. And so it's not only are we experiencing our immediate, our emotional response to what's happening at that time, but it's also precipitating the release of all these emotions that arise in response to like all these events that have occurred in our life that have caused us a lot of distress or suffering. And so, and the fact that we've shut down emotionally or numbed ourselves or distracted ourselves from what we've our authentic emotional responses, what happens is as we do that, it limits our processing capacity so that we're going through some difficult or challenging experience, we have a reduced capacity to actually handle our emotional responses, to be able to chew up, digest what we're feeling, because that's so important to our ability to work through issues, to resolve conflicts, to gain the crucial insights and the understandings that we need, and to navigate our lives more effectively. Let me touch base here with my notes. I'd like to be able to just remember everything. When I'm writing, I feel like I go into this sort of, deep introspective state. I'm able to just write and flow with it. And sometimes I can do that when I'm on camera. But often I find that more challenging. But anyway, so one of the dangers when we, again, if we struggle with this insecure attachment style, and we tend to, as children, where we experienced the abuse and neglect, and we didn't have a lot of the resources we need to cope effectively. And because it caused us so much pain, often we just dissociated. We went out into fantasy land, and it's kind of a survival mechanism at the time. But what often happens is it carries over into our adult lives. And so we didn't get a lot of what we needed in childhood. And so now we're adults and we're reenacting a lot of this drama in our adult intimate relationships and stuff. But when we go out into fantasy land, or we concoct these stories or these narratives about the person we're seeing or want to be intimate with, or a former partner and all that, it's like when we go into the narrative, we're out there in our head. We're stuck in our head. We're disconnected or dissociating from our bodies. And yet, at the same time, it does this thing I refer to as churning. Damn, that ambulance is really loud. So I think that's coming through on the microphone, and it's a bit distracting for me even. But anyway, again, we're off. We're caught up in that narrative and the stories that we generate. It takes us up into our head. But what happens is it creates this disconnect. So we're up in our heads, and there's all these powerful emotions that remain trapped in our bodies. And so as our head keeps spinning and going on and on, telling the stories, when you get into these, you call up your friend or something, or your, I remember just a few months ago, I was visiting another town, and a woman that I was working with, for instance, would go off into these narratives and just go on and on for quite some time. It's like events that had happened years ago even. And yet, in doing that, what happens is all these emotions get trapped in the body. And as you keep spinning with those stories, that narrative, and it's again, it's churning, it's generating more of these distressing emotions, and the emotions keep building up in the body. And a lot of that emotion, it's trapped in our chest cavity and the heart. It's much of it's held in the abdominal region, and it just builds up. It creates a greater disconnect from the body, and it actually reinforces these very painful, dysfunctional patterns. It's the patterns that get us where we get caught, in these really dysfunctional relational dramas. We attract people into our lives that tend to continue to say and do more of the things that cause us more pain. Again, that's why it's so important for us to bring our awareness to, when we're in these situations, acknowledge what's happening. What do you feel in response to what was said or done? What does it feel, the fact that maybe that person's not reciprocating your desire to be in relationship? How does it feel if someone's broken off the relationship? You no longer have that connection with them like you did. And as you're able to be present with these feelings, do the deep level processing, it brings you out of fantasy land. It brings you into the present moment. It facilitates a deeper integration between your intellect, these deeper emotional levels of yourself, your deeper subconscious, and your body. All these parts of you come more into alignment. So it's very crucial for healing. If you stay stuck in your head, you're stuck in the narrative, you're out there in fantasy land, you can't heal. The dynamic just keeps being perpetuated, and you keep suffering. Whether it's your current drama that's playing out, or maybe that relationship crashes and burns, and weeks, months, years pass by, you attract another person, you reenact the same kind of drama. So it just perpetuates the suffering. By the way, if you do if you find value in what you're hearing, be sure to like the video below, and even click subscribe, and share the video. If you know someone who's going through this kind of toxic relational drama, share the video with them. Could help them out to gain the much needed crucial insight or understanding to facilitate their healing, so that they can break out and free themselves from these patterns that cause so much suffering. So moving right along, reflect back on my notes real quick. So another thing that many of us do, it's like in our attempt to avoid the pain, the suffering that we go through in our breakup, maybe we jump into a relationship with someone else. And on one level, we're thinking that, oh, this new person's so much better, and I'm in love again. But you haven't necessarily resolved the issues, or no, you haven't. And much of what you haven't processed from your former partner, those emotions are still in your body. And so because of that, after some time, maybe you're feeling drawn again, you're feeling that pull to return back to the person that you were seeing before. Or maybe if you continue with the new person, then eventually what you haven't resolved from your former partner is going to project onto your current partner, or the person you're seeing now. Anything that we do to attempt to move on, if we're not taking the steps to do the deep level processing of the sadness and grief, the devastation of the breakup, if we're telling ourselves these angry, victimized stories, if we're self-medicating with alcohol and other recreational drugs, throwing ourselves back into work, all these things are going to prevent us from doing what it takes to truly heal. So we're not going to completely heal. It's like I see all the time, when I'd be doing classes, that people would show up. It'd be weeks, months, years, even decades later, and a lot of the sadness and grief, the devastation, is still trapped in their bodies. They haven't fully processed it. Over time, there's a diminishment of the intensity as people move through that acute stage of the grief and loss. And yet, there's this contraction, the way they contracted around the losses, and it diminishes their capacity to love and be loved. They can't open up, they can't be present. They're fearful, they're suspicious and guarded if someone does come into their life who could truly love them. So we need to do whatever it takes when we go through a painful breakup or any kind of devastating loss. The more we can be present with our authentic emotional responses, that facilitates the healing, the transformation, that we can use that in a way that increases our capacity to love and be loved. And as we embrace our losses, embrace the suffering, then there's a way in which it facilitates this transformation that enables us to attract individuals into our life who are a better match, that have a greater capacity to love and be loved. There's a lot that I write in these articles, and I often forget to say a lot of things when I record the video, so I encourage you to. I'll post the link to the article along with the video, so go back and read the article as well. And what else do I want to add here? So again, the more that we can be present, when we go through, a relationship is ending, a relationship is going through difficult stages. Initially, early on, when we first connect with someone and we're in love, or when we, anytime that we do feel connected, sure, we want to feel that, but it's important that we need to be able to feel our authentic emotional responses at whatever stage we find we are within a relationship. Even when we're in the more difficult stages, when we are uncertain about the future of a relationship, whether it's going to continue or not, or if it is ending. And as I said before, the more we can do that, it helps us to bridge the gaps between the parts of us that would go into fantasy. It brings us into the present, and we're able to embody ourselves here more in the present moment reality. And sure, it is going to feel overwhelming at times. And there may be times when you just feel like you want to escape and you wonder, how could I possibly survive this? But the more that you can be present with your authentic feeling responses, what it does is you develop this increased capacity to handle difficult or challenging emotions. And another advantage is that when you find yourself in moments of crises, times when, say, you would have just had a meltdown, or you would have shut down or contracted, times when other people just are not dealing or coping that well. And I see people in the midst of wars and other kinds of really catastrophic situations. The more you learn to work constructively with your emotions, you develop this greater capacity to show up more fully present, and you develop greater strength and resilience. And other people in time turn to you, because as you're holding it together, you help other people around you. Another thing that happens is that, we're, as we make the effort to be present, we bring ourselves out of fantasy land and back into the present moment. We acknowledge what's happening, and we're experiencing our authentic emotional responses. Invariably, as you do that, your mind will wander at times. I mean, it happens, but as much as you can catch yourself, whenever your mind is wandering, you're getting distracted, just bring yourself back again. What is it you actually feel in the moment? Center your awareness in these feelings and bodily sensations, and keep breathing from the depth of what you're feeling. So another thing that we need to consider too is that our physical senses alert us And they give us warning signs, such as if you happen to accidentally place your hand on the burner of the stove, and you feel the discomfort, obviously, or if you touch an electrical wire and you're getting shocked, it's a warning sign that if you don't pay attention, your body's going to suffer serious harm. Your sense of smell, if milk or some food item is spoiled and you can smell that, and it lets you know that if you drink that milk or consume that food. Also your vision, you can see mold or something that you found that was in the back of your refrigerator for a few weeks or months, and now it looks like a science experiment. If you eat that, you're going to get potentially deathly ill. So in a similar way, our emotions provide us a valuable source of information. So when we're disconnected from our authentic emotional responses, we don't get the crucial information and because of that, that's why a lot of people continue to stay in relationships where are, connected, are involved with a person, are in a situation where we continue to get hurt. And so that's why it's so important, again, emotional intelligence. Our emotions inform us. So when we need to be paying attention, we get a lot of crucial signals that there's intellectual intelligence, there's emotional intelligence, and our emotions provide us with a lot of insight and understanding that our intellect alone does not fully provide to us. So we need to pay attention to them. It's through our emotions that helps us to fully grasp and acknowledge the reality of. Another thing is that when we go through a painful breakup, is that there is this void that we experience. And so, when we're coupled with somebody, there's this way in which we meld together, and we're joined as a pair, as a unit, and we have this shared vision. And so as a relationship comes to an end, it's as though we're leaving a part of ourselves behind, and so we find ourselves, we're come home to an empty apartment, we're cooking by ourselves now, we're eating alone, we're laying in bed alone at night, and the void it's important that we're able to be present with that. We tend to want to fill that void, but there's the void itself that we experience is this time in which we're processing our experience of having been in the relationship with our former partner. And when we partner with someone, when we're in a relationship, there are aspects of that individual that we internalize. There are other aspects that we need to let go of in order to move on. And yet the parts of us that we internalize, we need that space in which we experience the void or the aloneness. It helps us to do that deep level processing by which we, this deeper intelligence within our body and mind is able to determine that what it is that we need to internalize, that we carry with us as we go forward into our lives. And it's hard to do that when you jump into a relationship with someone else and you self-medicate or with substances or food, or you distract yourself. And so give yourself time to be with that void. And we need to, as I said, be able to experience the absence without distracting us or numbing ourselves to the pain. When we go through a breakup, a divorce, any kind of separation or devastating loss, again, as I said, for many of us with insecure attachment styles as children, as I said before, our basic needs were not being met, and so we tended to disappear into fantasy land. And in so many ways, we resist the pain of our suffering. We resist the loss. I like what Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychoanalyst, said. Neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. But when you could embrace your experiences and your authentic feeling responses, it helps you to become more and more fully present. The fact that, as I said, many of our basic needs were not met. We didn't receive, in many instances, a lot of the love and nurturing and the encouragement and the support that we needed. And so the more that you can stay present, despite the fact that, yeah, we're going to be experiencing emotions that can be extraordinarily uncomfortable or painful or overwhelming at times. But the more that you can be present, instead of abandoning yourself. When we go into fantasy land, we're checking out, we are abandoning the parts of ourselves that are forced to hold a lot of these painful emotions. But the more that you can just stay present, well, you're actually being present to the parts of yourself that suffer. And so it's an act of self-care. Even more than that, it is an act through which you are loving yourself. Now, again, often we didn't receive the love we need, so there's a way in which we need to parent ourselves. And by being present, it's an act through which you are loving and being present with yourself. You're learning to comfort yourself, to soothe yourself. It's also, it's a very powerful process that we go through. It, in a sense, it cracks us open, and that it enables us to tap into resources that we would not otherwise access. That we experience greater strength and resilience, and we connect into that, this self-love and acceptance, this ability where we can experience greater compassion for ourselves, and not just for ourselves, to other people. And as that happens too, we become less and less dependent on other people or another individual, because we have this deepening sense of connectedness to a higher power, because ultimately you are the only one that you will never lose or leave. And so it's important to deepen that connection between your authentic core being and the higher power. So a lot to reflect on here. And so I'll leave you with that for today.